very good morning, Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome to PSA TV. This is the wake-up call. Coming on the heels of Monday's budget, of course, we have a lot of post-budget analysis. But before we go into that, let me say a special good morning and welcome to our studios, Mr. Stephen Broadbridge.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
A director of the Bois Conservation, a man of many portfolios. That's just one of the hats you wear. You're also...
I'm involved in ecotourism. Involved in the Trinidad and Tobago Incoming Tour Operators Association, where I'm the vice president. And I have an ecotourism company, Caribbean Discovery Tours. I've been doing it for 20-something years. And I'm involved in a lot of things. And of course, I'm very patriotic to Trinidad and Tobago. So I involve myself wherever I see necessary.
Yeah. So that's a little bit about him. Coming out of on the heels of Monday's budget, of course, we would have seen the Minister of Finance announcing some measures. One in particular that stood out would have been the banning of styrofoam. If I can just find it here properly. Okay, it's somewhere in here. But basically it was the banning the use of styrofoams starting next year, I believe it is.
Right. The thing about that is I've not seen, first of all, the credibility of government, and I really want to stay clear of all politics.
Yeah.
But the credibility is not there, because there's always talk about banning something, and they say, oh, we're going to ban it in so many years from now. You don't just ban things. First of all, you've got to put in legislation, you've got to put in alternatives. You can't say no Styrotex containers and there's no alternative. You've got to come up with the correct alternatives that are environmentally friendly. And honestly, you'll probably be hard pressed to find an environmentally friendly packaging for people vendors to sell food. You'd be hard pressed, because even some of the products we think are safe, paper products, have an environmental impact as well. I particularly don't like styrofoam, because styrofoam flakes off, it breaks, and pieces, it's very hard waste to manage. It's also very difficult to recycle. But even some of the paper products are difficult to recycle, and some of them have chemicals in them. Now, I am no chemist, so I don't remember all the names, but there's a waterproofing used on, you can't just use paper products with food, because the food will soak through. They use a waterproofing. I'm trying to remember, I think it's called a PFAS, I think is the chemical. They don't pronounce the S. Anyway, the chemical that you use to waterproof containers. It's not good. It's environmentally and health-wise, it's not a great product. And you'd be hard-pressed to find a safe product. And maybe even plastics might be, I don't like plastics, but plastics are sometimes easier to recycle than some of the paper products, and probably less toxic. Yeah. But the problem I have is that you're making statements in a budget, yet you've made no significant inroads on alternatives.
What do we use?
And therefore, when it comes down to the banning, you'll probably try to buy some more time, because you haven't done anything.
Yeah.
So where's the credibility is not there, because you don't throw things at the public and without telling us the plan. Because if I don't see a plan, I don't believe you. And I don't see a plan. I don't see proper research being done on anything. And there's no conversation about it. Even the Beverage Container Act. Remember how long ago Beverage Container Act was brought up? Where is it? Those are just empty promises. Politicians and empty promises,
But would you say that this is something that the banning of the importation of styrofoam, though, Would you say that this is something that should have been done a long time ago?
Yeah, I think it should have been, but I think
with proper consultation, of course.
But I think, yeah, there's not enough conversation on it. Well, maybe that's the wrong way. Maybe this conversation sounds like a lot of talk, and we don't really want a lot of talk. We want a lot of action, and the action would come in the way of intelligent talk, with research and consultation with professionals, that kind of talk, not talk mama guy in the public and so on. But I don't see any steps towards any of the important things. I hear talk without any meaningful conversation on anything that's happening. So I don't believe it. Credibility isn't there. The beverage, as we know, the Beverage Container Act was brought up a long time ago, and they keep putting deadlines on it, and it doesn't mean anything, because if you don't see people's actions going towards a goal, you realize there is no goal. There's no plan. And as far as I'm concerned, there is no plan. And we'll probably have styrofoam for a long time after this, or maybe they'll put some sort of substitute that may be worse. And it may be worse, but at least it'll be manageable though. The styrofoam, like I say, the problem I have with styrofoam is it breaks into little pieces. Mm-hmm. It's not something you can recycle very easily. Yeah. But even if we were to go and look for materials that are easy to recycle, those materials may still end up in the dump. They may still end up, we don't have a plan. Yeah. So to say we're not going to use styrofoam because we can't recycle it, we're going to use this because you can recycle it, and then we're not going to recycle it anyway, it's going to end up in the dump. So let's come up with a whole plan, not a piece of a plan.
And even if we look at the recyclable bins for glass bottles, for instance, you see one here, you see one another mile away perhaps, and it's not, I don't know how many people actually use it and use it correctly. So everything ends up in the dump at the end of the day.
And it's valuable material. You realize so these plastic bottles are valuable material. When you look at Beetham, and they call it a landfill, it's not a landfill, it's a dump. Beetham is a dump. That's right. And all the other ones in Trinidad. They need to realize that the materials are valuable. There's some other interesting ways of dealing with the waste issue. Besides recycling, I've seen in Europe and North America, I think in Canada, there's places that you can bring your container to the shop. They have these shops that they don't have containers. Yeah. You want to buy oil, you have to bring your own container. They measure it out and they pour it into the container that you have, and they bill you. And people come back and forth with the same containers, so they have zero waste.
That is good.
It sounds really inconvenient, but sometimes we have to become a little inconvenienced to save important things like our environmental health and so on. But maybe that's the way the world needs to go one day, is we need to show up with our containers, have it poured in. They're saving money, as well.
Yeah. Now, an article in The Guardian quotes you as saying that the banning of styrofoam importation is a step backwards.
The banning of styrofoam isn't, I don't think, a step backwards, but I think it's not a step backwards, it's positive, but it's still not complete. You ban, but where's the good alternative? Yeah. And where's the research behind the good alternative? And not being a chemist and all that, I'm at a disadvantage, but I wish I could see a plan, at least a plan, but there is no plan. But this, like I say, styrofoam needs to go, for sure. It's not manageable. It's not, it's brittle, it breaks into little pieces, it's very light, the wind takes it. Yeah. At least if we have something else that's solid, that, that we could think about recycling. Styrofoam is not something that's easy to recycle. I don't know if it's possible to recycle anything in styrofoam. So
not to my knowledge. No. But interestingly though, I'm seeing here in an article done by The Guardian, On July 28, 2018, the Minister of Planning and Development, Camille Robinson Regis, announced that the ban on styrofoam would be enforced in 2019. And from then to now, we've barely heard any kind of conversation.
But they just throw dates at you all the time. That's what we throw dates at. That's why I don't listen to them. I don't pay any attention to any dates that come up. They don't mean anything to me because I'm not gonna. There's zero credibility, and it just won't happen. You know. So, and if maybe they will ban it, but it's not going to be the date they say. Whatever the date is, it's way down the line. Maybe they're waiting for an even later date so that maybe they would not be in power and the ball will be. I'm sure political groups do that all the time. They put all the things they don't want to handle into a time when they think they won't be in power, and and let the other people take care of it.
Because I mean, if you look at most of the measures announced in the budget, everything is proposed for 2020.
All the unpleasant things or the difficult things.
Yeah, it makes you think, okay, so you're coming out of office, you still have time in 2019, but yet you're going to have all these things implemented in 2020. I'm sure when they're campaigning.
So
yeah.
So when you're campaigning, they don't have time to do anything.
And funny enough, the Minister of Finance has been defending the budget, saying it's not an election budget, but you can't help but say,
He's right, it's not an election budget, because after seeing the budget, I wouldn't vote for anybody with a budget like that. And I'm not political. I really don't. I'll vote for whoever's doing the best job. Yeah. But I mean, he's right. It's not a election budget, because anybody with any sense would look at it and not vote that way. So he's correct. But I see nothing that will move Trinidad forward in that budget. I don't see enough on agriculture.
Let's talk a bit about agriculture. I mean, this country, like we were just saying before, we have so much to offer, just like tourism. Mm-hmm. But when you look at some of the factors that come into play where government is supposed to do its part.
Not everything is for government to do. Private individuals are supposed to also come up with plans and actions and so on. But very often the state needs to be involved in tourism. All over the world, the state is involved in marketing the destination, because the private companies don't have the kind of cash it takes to market a destination. Yeah. They can only do a part of a job. And then also things like, of course, you have foreigners crossing your boundaries, you have things like immigration to deal with, and airlift and things like that private companies can't handle. You depend on government for those things. Unfortunately, tourism, like many other industries, are bled dry. The tourism actually does pay taxes. There's a lot of tax revenue is earned. Imagine every hotel in Trinidad and Tobago pays room tax. Wow. And the room tax, and then our companies and my company and the Tour Operator Association, we have our taxes that we pay, but we contribute billions of dollars, and locals don't realize that tourism, even though you don't see much of a tourism industry here, we still contribute billions in taxes. Yeah. But none of that tax money is put back. It goes into a central fund, never to be seen again. Nothing is reinvested. There has not been any significant drive for press advertising, marketing for Trinidad in particular for over 4 years. The rest of the Caribbean has actually had record earnings over the last 4 years. Record earnings in tourism. Ours has been record low. Most of the operators in the Tour Operator Association said that they are earning the lowest amount they have earned in 20 years. So it's pretty bad, and we have fantastic ecotourism opportunities. We have places like Caroni Swamp, a blow mine for most guests that go in there. Flamingos and scarlet ibis and anteaters, and Nariva Swamp with the howler monkeys, macaws. I mean, there's so much here. We over 100 waterfalls in Trinidad, fantastic waterfalls. Everything that an ecotourist wants. There's no mention in the budget about that.
No.
There's a mention about conferences, conference centers, and I'm in the Trinidad and Tobago Tour Operators Association is a significant player, a major stakeholder in tourism, because we bring the guests in, we put them in the hotel rooms, we sell the packages. And we have not met, I have never met the Minister of Tourism. And I'm the Vice President of the association. So we have no conversation with the Minister of Tourism.
And that's not good.
And therefore, our opinion is not,
it doesn't count for anything.
No, but we are the ones that speak to the guests, and we know what they were looking for and all that. And they don't consult us. And the ecotourism is just not being mentioned. We have the busiest leatherback nesting site in the world in Trinidad. And Tobago is pushed because they have their own thing, but Tobago hardly has any turtles. It has 200 birds. Trinidad has 470 birds. They have 200 birds. We have more waterfalls. We have bigger wetland areas, better. For ecotourism, Tobago is fantastic for the beach and so on, but nothing in the budget addresses the tourism that many consultants have told us to go towards.
And it's not just preservation of the environment and our beauty and ecotourism, but it's a matter of now marketing it. And that is where we've seen absolutely nothing in the budget.
No, and there hasn't been anything for 4 years. If you consider that when TDC was dissolved, there was nothing put in place for many years after TDC was gone.
But I think tourism took a really sharp nosedive when TDC dissolved.
Yeah, well, the TDC had its problems, but at least there was something there. And then there was nothing there. Then they established a new entity, and then they were supposed to have a board. The board was put in place many months down the line. Then there was an argument, and the chairman was, I don't know all the ins and outs there, but I know that...
You're speaking to the most recent incident?
Yeah, and then another board was put in place, but budgets were not released and all that. I think there was a good reason to separate Trinidad and Tobago. Everybody was saying, why are you separating Trinidad and Tobago? It should be like one package, because Tobago has great scuba diving and wonderful and marine environment. Trinidad has a better eco environment. Yeah. And together it's a fantastic, with Caroni Swamp and Nylon Pool, so it looks really good on the poster. But they separated the two and said it's going to be Tobago separate from Trinidad. And we were wondering why they're doing that. And we realized that it's because they want to support tourism in Tobago because that's popular. Yeah. And they don't want Trinidad to be holding on. They want to dump Trinidad. That's what we feel. But, the budget does reflect a lack of interest in those things, important things like agriculture. And agriculture is an environmental issue as well, because you consider, we're talking about the world environment, let's talk about global warming, and the bigger picture, not just our islands. Mm-hmm. We importing food. That's a really environmentally terrible thing, because it has to be the fuel that it takes to send that food across to these islands. It's environmentally not correct. We should be growing stuff and less importing. It's better for us financially, and also better for us on a world environment thing as well, and health is too, fresher vegetables and all. Where is the development of agriculture? With agriculture being developed, maybe we'd need less packaging, because the packaging that we're throwing away, the plastics and things, everything that they bring in probably has to come with its some sort of solid waste that we don't know how to deal with. And if we had the farmers, we'll also package some stuff as well, but going to the market, and buying things, you can bring your own bag and put as I have done. I go into the market every now and again, and I put things in a bag that I bring, and it's much more environmentally friendly. And then importing stuff from across the world that has to be, fuel needs to be burnt to deliver it to us, which is not good for global warming. And then we have packaging to dispose. And we need food security. What if there is maybe nothing as dramatic as a world war or just global warming causing extreme conditions elsewhere, and we don't have food? What are we going to eat? Oil? We need to produce our own food security.
I mean, oil. When you look at oil, the minister was recently quoted as saying that the country just has 14 years of oil in its reserves. So
that doesn't matter if we have 14 years of reserves. It doesn't matter, because it's not a matter of if we have it. It's a matter of if the world wants it. If the world is going off of oil, there are countries that have become that are complete, like Costa Rica, for example. Costa Rica is not depending on oil at all. They're using hydro, every other source. They're using renewable sources of energy, and they're not interested in buying oil. They might have it for their vehicles still. Yeah. Places like the Netherlands said that in a few years they're going to only allow electric cars. There's going to be no combustion engines.
And I know there was talk about having that in Trinidad. I know the president of the Automobile Dealers Association, he has been trying to push that in Trinidad, but there's only so much one person can do. And like you said, rightly said, when the minister doesn't have consultation with the necessary bodies, the people who do the groundwork, like yourself, like Mr. Bois, where he would actually be the one telling you, well, let's try to go friendly and do things not to make the environment worse, but have the introduction of electric cars. And that's there. And I think he's recently brought 1 or 2 cars in.
But the cars are very expensive, and the only way I can see electric cars, you see, you never want to be totally dependent on government, but we are dependent on government for certain things. There are private things that you can do separate from the state, but at the end of the day, if you're going to import electric cars, you need to have, you're going to be paying import duties. If the cars are already expensive, the only way to get Trinidadians to start driving electric cars is going to have to remove a significant amount of the import duty to make the price sensible and affordable for locals. So the state always has an effect on how things are. If a project can actually work, or if an idea can work, you always have to have some sort of state involvement where they commit to reducing taxes or importation or something. But we need to get electric cars in here, and we need to remove the import duty to make them, at least most of the import duty, to make them
I think that is what
feasible.
Mr. Bois has been trying to get, but again, there's a failure by the current minister to even meet with him, to even acknowledge his letters. So, something as much as going forward in a better manner for the country, it's just there. And it's just an idea until something is done properly from the minister's end. And like you said, we need to have these discussions with the minister. We need to have more than just discussions, in fact. We need to see things being done from the government's end, because they, at the end of the day, it's their job to remove taxes, as the case may be, to make these cars now more affordable to the average public, because at the end of the day, it will benefit not just the person who's buying the car, but the country as a whole.
Yeah, and the world. It's not, global warming is everybody's business around, and we are not a significant population, but we have an effect, and everybody has to do their thing on the global warming issue, or climate change.
Yes.
Trinidad should be playing its part, and even things like plastics and solid waste, when it goes into the ocean, all garbage that goes down the rivers, like the Gamatin River, you should see after a good heavy rain, straight into the sea, all those plastics. That is not just affecting Trinidad and Tobago. The currents will take the plastics, especially after they break down. Plastic doesn't stay whole. It stays, eventually, after many years, it breaks into little tiny pieces that get into the food chain, into the fish eat it, and even in the plankton. These days, there are people doing research on plankton, and they're finding you're hard pressed to find any corner of the globe where the plankton do not have plastics in them.
Oh, wow.
And of course, plankton being a very low on the food chain, it gets into everything. So we are eating plastic. I'm sure every human being has a fair amount has plastic in their system. That's not good. No. And what ends up in the ocean in Trinidad can probably one day be found in Alaska, or
Yeah.
So the whole world is connected, and we need to realize that. And Trinidad has a responsibility to not just to ourselves, but to the rest of the world. And we need to be good world citizens. And we're not good world citizens, because we don't seem to care about anything. We have very narrow self-interest.
And it's not like we're even talking about it. We just kind of bypass it. It's like, oh, that's climate change. Okay, next. Like, we don't see the importance of preserving our environment in this country. No. And I think we, too many times, even if you look at flooding, you made mention of the Diego Martin River, but I believe it's somewhere, San Juan or Barataria, somewhere there. When you see the end result of flooding, and it's just plastic bottles.
And deforestation. Our northern range, every dry season, our northern range burns. There is no effort made by the state to apprehend the people, and they're not natural fires, and we don't ever believe that nonsense. There's no such thing as a natural fire.
Natural fire, okay.
No, yeah, fires, it's already been studied, and it's not even worth arguing about. I mean, everybody knows no such thing as a glass stone, sulfur, rock fire, all man-made. And there is no effort made to stop, or apprehend or charge a person lighting a bushfire. Yeah. Bushfires are, in other countries, in Australia and parts of the US where they have bushfires, it's a major, major crime. You get caught, in some countries, if you get caught lighting a bushfire, it's 20 years in prison, it's no joke. And Trinidad, slap you on the wrist, you might get a fine. But that's if they even bother to come and find you. And they're leaving the fires to burn.
Well, I mean, if it is now that they're saying that this is a natural caused fire, then I've never...
Okay, let's say they were natural cause, which is absolute nonsense. But let's say they were natural cause. Still have to put them out. What efforts made to put them out? We have, when the northern range burns, the forest acts like a sponge. It holds the water. A lot of water is held in the mountains, and it's slow release. So the dry season, we have a flow of water in the rivers coming from the mountains.
Yeah.
When you remove that forest, there is nothing to hold that water there, so it rushes down. That causes flash flooding. That a significant amount of the flooding is caused by removal of the mountain forest. So somebody lighting a fire is causing millions of dollars worth of damage, and flood damage, and even damage to the forest itself has a value. I mean, you consider the habitat loss is not just you're also burning cedar trees and things that have actual monetary value, but you're causing damage to people's property and estates and things lower down.
You can't stop a fire from entering someone's private property.
No, but people are lighting fires to clear land here. And
I think this is the other issue that comes up with it, even squatting. Because many times you have people just, you see a piece of the mountain, and you just clear it, and you set up shop, and you live there. And there's a bigger issue of squatting.
Mm-hmm. Because you're somebody who just pops a house up on a burnt area. Consider the runoff. I mean, where is their sewage going? They probably have an outhouse up in the mountains, so the sewage is going to wash down somewhere. Where is their waste? Obviously in the mountains, some of them don't have a road connection. Where is their solid waste going, their garbage? And if the garbage is being burnt, it's going up into the atmosphere, it's creating more pollution. There needs to be some sort of regulation, but not just down to the individual in the mountain burning, but what about the illegal quarrying? There's a number of illegal quarries in Trinidad. What's happening with that? I mean, everybody knows you can't hide a quarry. How do they hide quarries? And if there's an illegal quarry, why is the state so reluctant to go and shut them down? When last did you hear an illegal quarry being shut down? And there are a lot of them, and everybody knows what they are.
Yeah.
And why is there no action? You know, we're destroying the island of Trinidad and Tobago, but we're also contributing to hurting the world. You know, it's not just down to us. We're burning things. Go and pass on Beetham Estate early in the morning, on that Beetham Road, a highway. People are burning plastics there to clear, you know, they're burning the dump sometimes. Sometimes you come in, you can't breathe on the highway there. Yeah. You also have rubber tires. A lot of people don't realize, but in parts of central Trinidad, when the lights go out and the sun goes down, people are burning rubber tires to get rid of them, because tires are bulky, and they are we dispose of a few million tires in Trinidad every year, and they're a problem. But they're a problem because we make them a problem. If you take the metal out of them and produce something called rubber crumb, and they crumb the thing, there's a valuable product that people all over the globe import, because it's used in road building material. A rubberized road lasts longer. I don't think Junior Sammy and those people would be too happy, because the rubberized road mixed the rubber crumb into the asphalt, means that the road becomes almost flexible. You know, you won't get cracks and the thing flaking off. It's a very it's a useful product. You can also manufacture things from rubber crumb. But we choose to take our rubber and take it into a field where nobody's looking at nighttime and burn it, and black smoke up into the atmosphere. And it's just not a sensible thing, because instead of making money, we decide to make a problem.
In your opinion, what is the biggest challenge facing our environment?
The biggest problem facing our environment? I think, you know what, I'm talking about the world or Trinidad and Tobago?
Trinidad and Tobago.
Well, I think it's similar to the world, but I think population. I think people need to realize that more people means more pollution, because we can try doing all kinds of solutions and things like waste control and recycling and so on. But at the end of the day, the more people there are, the more burden there is on the environment. And I think the world population is like 7 billion or something like that. And that's a little, that needs to get a little control. I think people should not be having as many children. They should, you know, maybe have less children. Families, in the old days, I think people used to have 10 children. I think those days need to not happen anymore.
I think it has been kind of progressing away from that. But
the population is still growing, and it's not a lot of developing countries. It's still, for whatever reason, populations are flying, you know, and it's harder. You know, we have to feed people, and the bigger the population, the more land you need to clear and feed, and then we need our trees. What the biggest problem I could see in Trinidad, probably, I mean, it's hard to pick one big problem, because they're all in its environment. Everything is interlinked. I think protecting our water resources by stopping it from being polluted and wasted. Fresh water shouldn't be drained straight into the ocean. That's what we do as a solution for flooding all the time. We say, get that water out of here. We want to dry out our island. Whereas we should be probably directing our fresh water into holding ponds and lakes and things, and not trying to send every drop into the sea. When a drought comes, our farmers will have water. If we, you know, I think we did produce on ponds on a lot of state land for farmers already, but we need a lot more. We need to protect our freshwater resources, but we also need to deal with solid waste, and we need to deal with air pollution. I think those three, you know, significant things. And the solid waste is a major thing. because we're producing an awful lot of it. I don't remember in my childhood as much plastic being generated.
No.
You know, and that is a solvable problem if we get into, even if we don't want to recycle, we could start separating and sending it to somebody, another country that wants to recycle. I think Sweden boasted about a couple of years ago that they were from other countries. So countries that want our solid waste, we need to separate it, clean it, package it, compress it or whatever, and ship it out, you know.
Export it, yeah.
It's not and we don't have to invent anything. It's being done in other countries. We just need probably to borrow some of the expertise from other countries to solve up our problems. Are not unique to Trinidad. There are plastics everywhere, and countries have ways of dealing with it. There are products that can be made from plastics as well with recycling. I know in Barbados they were making roofing tiles out of plastic bottles like this.
Yes,
and,
I've seen that.
And lots of other products can be made. We need to stop being a throwaway country. We need to start being recycling and using a lot of our waste products for manufacturing.
And when you speak about throwing away, I can't help but think about littering.
Yeah, the littering is not. It shouldn't be tolerated. People here do it too easily. It's like no big deal.
It's because we don't have the sufficient fines put in place. You know, I think they should.
Isn't it a shame we have to do it that way with fines? Why can't people sort of just make the right decision?
Yeah.
Trinidadians need to become more patriotic. I don't think Trinidadians, I should say Trinidadians and Tobagoans are patriotic. I think going and showing up at a football match with a red shirt doesn't mean you're patriotic.
That is what I was going to say. You know, it's a matter of convenience, as is with everything. You do what is beneficial to you. So
narrow self-interest is big.
We're a selfish
problem.
nation.
We are, but we need to realize that it ain't no big deal to keep your bottle and put it in the right place. But the thing is, the private individual there can be correct in their disposal, but what's happening after that the person's done the right thing. Let's say the person has done the right thing. They put it in the garbage. It's going to Beetham Estate, where it creates another problem because the state needs to be involved. At the end of the day, the state needs to be doing the right thing as well. It's not down to us alone, you know. It's the state has to have a solution to after the waste is collected. There were people like I remember there was a company called Plastic Keep that was around that was taking away people's plastics, and they had a very good campaign. But unfortunately, it's just another one of these businesses that was getting lots of money, but there was no secondary stage. They were collecting all this stuff, and it looked really cool, and they were collecting it. But what were they doing with it after? There was no plan after. They were being funded with state money, but there was no. I imagine a lot of people made a lot of money, but we didn't get a solution to the problems.
Speaking of funding by state, I mean, when you look at the front page of all three newspapers today, you see funding of state funding of some NGOs that no inspection was done. But you know, something that is very disturbing, and of course, I'm sure most of you are aware of what I'm talking about, the removal of 69 mentally patients. I don't want to say they are mentally challenged, because not all were. They are basically were in a rehab center. And the issue of state funding, you know, I
didn't know about the state funding. You say they were actually funded
under the previous administration.
With no proper inspections? Or?
No, nothing. And as much as you don't want to bring the state into something, it has to be brought in, because that's where the money is being spent, when monies could have been spent wisely into tourism, agriculture. But you have here that an NGO was receiving millions of dollars, was never inspected.
But you know, you need to look at the other problems as well. I mean, the NGO was treating, doing to me a crime.
Helping.
It was a crime.
But in his head, I think he thought he was probably trying to help. Or
in his mind, he might have also been trying to help himself by getting lots of money.
And he saw an opportunity where he could use this as a way of getting money for himself.
Well, we don't know without a proper investigation, because I don't know what was released in the press so far, which is not a lot, because there's not been any enough investigation time. But the thing is, as appalled as I was at the images, let's also remember that a lot of mental patients in Trinidad end up on the street.
Yeah.
And the conditions in there, the cages, were appalling. But also remember the ones that are not even inside those cages, they had beds. Some of them are sleeping hard on the street, in the rain or whatever. And we need to deal with our mental patients a lot more. I mean, sometimes we deal with a few of them by electing them into government, and they have a better life, but we can't have all of the mental patients in government. So they need to help them. Then we look at people on the street, and a lot of times we think drug addicts and all that, they got themselves where they are. Not the case. You have people with schizophrenia or other mental problems and issues, and they are disowned by their families and sleeping on the road. And as sensational as this one here, look, cages and modern day slavery and all that, and it sounds what about the ones that are on the street? Why don't we make a fuss about them? Why is everybody Trinidadians, and we like stories like this because he could talk about it and say all kinds of things. But what about the people quietly sleeping on the streets, starving and fighting the elements, and probably also being victims to crime, as exposed in the thing? What about those mental patients there?
Welcome back to PSA TV. This is the Wake Up Call. On set, I've got with me, he is the director of the Bois Conservation and also a tour operator and a member of the tourism.
Well, it's the Trinidad and Tobago Incoming Tour Operators Association, and I have my private company that's the member, Caribbean Discovery Tours. I'm the vice president.
I also address him as an environmentalist, someone who has been championing the environment and it's everything that comes with it. I'm actually now finding here my point that I was looking for, the ban of importation of styrofoam in the food industry and to terminate the use of plastic water bottles in government offices from January 1st, 2020. And we also have the removal of all taxes and duties on all inputs of farming to become a tax-free industry. We were talking about agriculture just now. What are your thoughts on this measure implemented here? Well, announced here.
I think farmers need as much support as they can get, but I think that it's still, there's so many issues to do with farming that have not been addressed, and one of them is great to give them make them exempt from taxes and so on, but farmers are robbed regularly. Yeah. The larceny is ridiculous. I mean, and you also have issues with land. The land is not available. Not good land is sometimes taken away from them, and it's given to people who have no intention in farming. There's a lot of land that the state willfully that's allocated as farmland, and it's construction happens on it. You look at the one that flooded. What's the one that flooded? Not this rainy season, the one before, by Trin City.
St. Helena down
There was the one right by near Trincity Mall that the government housing that got flooded out. That's not housing land. That was actually listed as farmland. There was a misuse of the land.
Yeah.
Government had built housing on farmland.
Farming land, yeah.
There are issues where government leases land to people that are not farmers, and it's farmland. And they say that.
And I'm happy you're saying this because it to the average citizen, let's say you were to get land approved from Town and Country, and they tell you, well, this is agricultural land, you can't build on it. But here it is, you have the government building on land that was approved for agriculture and not residential purposes. But no one finds anything wrong with that until something happens.
Well, you have also times when the state has actually leased farmland out to somebody they very well know they know is not a farmer. Why would you rent on big amounts of land, and then those people just sit on the land and they do no farming?
Yeah.
And basically, what they should do is if somebody wants a farm to lease land from the state that's farmland, they should have to make it productive immediately. If they don't make it productive, they should lose their lease. I thought something was put in place like that, but it doesn't seem to be happening. But you can't, if you get the state land, the farmland, it has to be productive. If not, you should move aside and give it to a farmer that will make it productive. But when you're leasing massive amounts of state farmland to people who have no idea on how to farm, obviously they're not going to farm.
Yeah.
And they have other ulterior motives. And usually they'll sit on that land very quiet for a long time, and then construction will start, and then they'll housing developments, and they'll be paying farmer rates for their land, so which is very low leasing arrangements, and we need to not ignore the farmers' problems. We need to start realizing that we need to be very serious about the theft of their crops. If somebody shows up in the market with a truckload of cabbage, they need to account for where they got the cabbage, or wherever it's being sold. Even on the highway, maybe the police should stop and check trucks that are carrying those, and let's see where they got it from. If they bought from the farmer, they should have a receipt. But there needs to be some sort of investigation and better patrolling of the farmland areas.
Yeah.
The farmers need a lot more than just tax cuts. They need help with the land, and they need help with the theft, the larceny, and everything else that goes with farming. The farmers are not treated well in this country. They're not. Remember when they needed water?
Oh my gosh.
For the drought, and how they were treated then.
Yeah.
So they're not supported. Even the Prime Minister said that that there was not enough land for farmers, and that showed that he,
Again, it's something that has been sidelined. We've always treated agriculture like it's the bastard child of the government and of the country as a whole. If you look at the allocations, and I always make this point, the allocations for agriculture has been decreasing over time. What could $0.7 billion do for agriculture?
I am no expert on the finance or the farming, but I know as somebody that is out and about around farmers, and I hearing their complaints, it's not going to do too much.
Let's get
That's not a meaningful move to help anybody.
Right, so the actual figure is $0.708 billion. For farmers who they have a myriad of problems. But here it is, you just say, well, all right. Every year, it's just decreasing and decreasing and decreasing.
We need food security. I can say that many countries are keeping food for themselves now. I mean, I remember that places like I think parts of Russia used to actually export wheat to other countries, and all of a sudden they said, oh, world conditions are changing and all that. We're not getting enough for ourselves. Nobody can have any, we're keeping our wheat. And the one by one products may go that way. I mean, with climate change, food may become scarcer and scarcer, and people may not want to sell to us. What if everybody says, oh, sorry, Trinidad and Tobago, we're not selling food to you? What are we going to do?
Yeah.
We need to start getting some food security here. And also it will affect our foreign exchange. We don't want to be sending, you know, when you go, I went to the market last weekend, and all the bananas are coming from imported. We can grow bananas really easily here. Why are we importing bananas? I can't figure that out. Well, I have the little sticker on them.
Most of the...
They're coming from the Dominican Republic, yeah. And that's extraordinary that we are importing that. And into government institutes as well. I mean, you go into our prisons and school feeding programs, and it's all imported food. You know, we need to at least have the prisons and hospitals locally fed.
Well, all we need to do is just invest a little more in agriculture. Take care of your farmers, because at the end of the day, they can be the one feeding the nation properly. You won't have to depend on importing food.
And have you seen also in fisheries? If you go to Bois and look at the state of the fishing depot that these poor Bois fishermen have to draw. I mean, there was a facility, it was fixed up a bit, but not really with much consultation with the fishermen themselves. So some things are not inadequate, but at least something was done for their lockup, for their engines and so on. But if you look at the slipway, a simple thing like a slab of concrete to pull their boats out, and there's BRC, because it's all cracked up on BRC, but they've been begging for that slipway to be fixed for probably about 12 years, if I remember correctly. It started deteriorating and mashing up, but we need to make it comfortable for our fishermen. Our fishermen, not only they have to deal with deteriorating facilities like slipways and so on for their getting the boats up, they also have to deal with Venezuelan pirates.
External factors.
And we're not doing a very good job protecting our
borders,
fishermen on the coasts.
And even
on the coast. The coast is dangerous terrain now with the piracy. But what kind of protection are we giving a fisherman? You know, Israeli is an awful career to be in. Any sort of food production is an awful. You don't expect any support. Don't expect any appreciation or anything. You're doing an essential thing for your country, but you're not going to be appreciated for it or supported in any way by government. This government and many governments before have no interest in food production whatsoever. They will do nothing for you.
Let's talk a bit about the increase in minimum wage from $15 to $17.50. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know how it's going to help, because even at that amount of money with the cost of living, I don't know anybody that gets paid minimum wage, because if you get paid minimum wage, you can't survive.
Trust me, we have a lot.
But then again, if you put a minimum wage in, which is kind of funny, because you have a minimum wage, and we always talking about indentured labor and how wrong it was, and how when the Indians came to Trinidad, they were paid so little, and they were put in terrible conditions, and so on, and they had very little rights. And then we did the same thing with the Chinese. We brought the Chinese in as indentured labor. We didn't care. They didn't get paid minimum wage. They had lived in horrific conditions. And so it's funny how we criticize the colonies for doing this terrible indentured labor, and we recreate the same thing with the Chinese, and because they were contract labor from exactly the same thing. And maybe the similar stuff with the Venezuelans now, because now we have the Venezuelan immigrants who are probably working for below minimum wage, but that's okay. And the locals will say, right, we want the minimum wage, and the Venezuelans will just will go in and do it for below that.
Yeah.
And I don't know I don't know how meaningful it is. And plus that, you're fighting up for minimum wage, and you can't survive on minimum wage. The food has become too expensive, and everything else has become too expensive.
Yeah.
So who could afford to work for minimum wage, whether it's been raised or not? I don't know, boy. That most of these things in these budgets mean nothing to me, because I don't think they mean anything to anybody. Raising the minimum wage by a few dollars too.
In this day and age.
Yeah, I think that.
I mean, don't get me wrong. A lot of people will be grateful for it, because it's an additional $400 per month. But
when they raise it, the people, first of all, employers in Trinidad are not easy. Employers in Trinidad do not realize how important human resources are. And you can see that because even in companies, profitable companies, they are reluctant to train their personnel. They're reluctant to invest any kind of money in them, and their exploitation is wide. I mean, a lot of workers in Trinidad are exploited, and they are not valued.
Yeah.
The most important thing, I think, in any organization, whether private or public, is the people, the personnel. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the personnel are not great either. I mean, let's face it, a lot of institutions you go into in Trinidad, workers are a problem. There's absolutely awful work ethic. It's awful.
But why? You often wonder why. But it's because of the way in which they are treated. You have people working for salaries since 20.
I agree with you, but I also disagree with you, because I know contradictions to that. I know people that are paid very well, and they still do nothing. Look at Petrotrin. Petrotrin, some salaries, I don't want to get into how much they were paid and all that, but I personally know some people that worked in Petrotrin that were paid very generously, and they did nothing too. They didn't care about anything, they did nothing. The work ethic has nothing to do with, everybody links everything to money. Everything doesn't always come down to money. Even crime, when you say crime is because of poverty, you're insulting poor people. Poor people are not the only people responsible for crime, and there are poor people who are law-abiding citizens and very conscientious. Money has nothing to do with anything. Don't always, it's not like they say the root of all evil. People are the root of all evil.
Sure.
You have wealthy people who are just as criminal as some of the poorer criminals. So if it's down to personal ethics and greed and selfishness and so on, and you're not you're looking at a country that is crippled by narrow self-interest and greed, and it's nothing to do with poverty or who's getting paid what and all that. It's when you go into one shop I went into the mall, a food place that was manned by Trinidadians before, and much more Trinidadians. And you used to have to wait a long time for your food with some sulky people. Whether somebody's paying you a lot or a little, you don't put it out you don't make the general public suffer for it. Somebody comes to buy food, you can smile. There isn't anything to smile and say hi and serve them the food. They now have Venezuelans working in that same place. They have 3 Venezuelans instead of 6 Trinidadians before. They smile, they're friendly, and they're fast. There's no line anymore. Why was there a line when they had the Trinidadians working there? Now the Venezuelans are working there, there's no line. Now, I hope they're not abusing the Venezuelans too, because they might now be underpaying the Venezuelans. But the Trinidadians need to step up to the plate and start doing a better job with the service. The service is awful. Even things like government services, like for example, one of the biggest complaints I have, it being 20 years plus in tourism, I speak to my guests that come from whatever country, and they always say Trinidadians were so friendly. They were the nicest people we've come across, and they're going into their little communities, and people are so nice to them. But he said, but the immigration, it was horrible. And you hear stories that they tell you about our immigration at the airport are damn right abusive. They are nasty. I hear story after story of how we're trying to build a tourism industry, and these people in immigration are abusing our guests before even first impressions are important, you know. You have these people coming in, the first impression they're getting of our country is these very angry, they're very hostile immigration people who do not see the tourism industry as important, obviously, because they wouldn't be. But I was just saying that that's not necessary. Everything isn't down to money.
Yeah.
Some things are down to your insight, your understanding of why something you're doing is how it's going to reflect on your country and yourself and your personal ethics,
I think
your behavior.
It ties it back into the point you were making about patriotism.
Yeah. But crime and all these things and service and all down to money. They're down to, because they're the big boys that have the money that are just as unethical. They will do a different type of crime, and also care very little for their customer. You have people who are making a lot of money that care very little for their customers or their workers.
All right, so we just have about a few minutes to wrap things up. Your closing comments.
Oh boy, that's hard because we talked about so many different things. I would say that Trinidad and Tobago, become more patriotic. Think of the interest of your country and the world, rather than just your own. And maybe collectively, if everybody did that, everybody's environment will improve. You know, no man is an island. We need everybody to do the right thing for all of us to benefit. Yeah. So think at the bigger picture all the time. Don't have narrow self-interests and your own. You think bigger. That's all.
Think bigger. Something for all of us to think about, of course. Think bigger. Mr. Broadbridge, thank you so much for coming on this morning.
You're welcome.
We have been chatting here this morning with the Director of Papago Conservation on the ban of the importation of styrofoam into this country and the use of plastic bottles at government offices from January 1st, 2020. It was a measure announced by the Minister of Finance, Colm Imbert, in Monday's budget presentation. We've also chatted a bit about agriculture, the need and the importance of farmers in our country, and why we should do more for various reasons, mainly to have a sustainable economy, increase foreign exchange, and basically have a happier and healthier Trinidad and Tobago. This is PSA TV. We're going to head to news right now and come back with more. Stay with us.